Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the virus, Pearl Harbor, Passover, and Easter, an interview with Dr. Everett Piper, the author of Not a Daycare, and the virus is killing America's small businesses. And I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Well, this is Easter week, as many of you likely know, and we had a statement. I want to play this statement first out of America's Attorney General. He made an interview statement relating to the week we are in the midst of right now as it relates to the coronavirus. So Matt, the wonderful producer, doing this show from his home, grateful for that. I'm doing the show from my home as we are in the middle of our shutdown. But Matt has a clip of the Surgeon General of the United States talking about what to expect this week with respect to coronavirus.
And how long will it last?
Well, it's tragically fitting that we're talking at the beginning of Holy Week, because this is going to be the hardest and the saddest week of most Americans' lives, quite frankly. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country. And I want America to understand that. But I also want them to understand that the public, along with the state and the federal government, have the power to change the trajectory of this epidemic. You mentioned
Okay, so that was Dr. Jerome Bell. He is our United States Surgeon General. He's talking about America, our country this week, and this being our Pearl Harbor in the same sentence, kind of like our 9/11. He's trying to warn Americans that they're going to be, based on the models, which have been extremely unreliable, but on the models, this may be a height of problems for America with respect to coronavirus infections, hospitalizations, and even death, trying to give America a heads up that this may be a very tough week. And I wanted to start today's First Five just by contrasting what he had to say and the predictions he had to make with the holy season that we are in right now. Tomorrow, Passover starts. It lasts, I think, 10 days. Passover, obviously, most Christians are aware, is one of the great stories of the Old Testament in which God protected his people from the wrath of Pharaoh. Secondly, we are in the middle of Holy Week, meaning we have this past Sunday, Palm Sunday, this coming Sunday, Easter. It is a season of hope and renewal. And part of what we have to do as Americans is dig in a little bit in our faith and in our certainty that this season of renewal actually means something today. It's not just a nice Bible story or I get to get a new dress and wear it on Easter Sunday or having an Easter egg hunt. It is about hope and renewal, and it's really part of the founding of America. These ideas behind the scriptures, the Old Testament and New Testament scriptures, the promise of God's care. We need to have more Americans digging in with their hearts and their prayer to that notion in response to coronavirus. Secondly, when we Americans were hit on when Pearl Harbor attack happened, and we were hit on 9/11, and people were shocked and dismayed. No one said about America, well, I guess we're just going to give up. No one said, I guess we'll just let the Japanese and Germans win World War II. Why don't we all start learning Japanese and German? No one said that. We had a stand up and fight attitude. Same with 9/11. We had a stand up and fight attitude. Find out who did this to us and make sure they hear from us so they won't do it again. In the coronavirus situation we are facing, we've been talking in the show for 2 weeks now about data being incorrect, prognostications being incorrect, and the amount of government police state authority or I'm calling police state authority, expanding around the country, taking away individual freedom. Our fight in this country against coronavirus is not just against the virus. We do need to do all the fighting there is. We need to be supporting efforts to find a vaccine, to develop medications that can help, and also to all these wonderful businesses stepping up, changing the manufacturing. So they're producing masks and all sorts of great things that are needed, ventilators and all of that. But the real fight we have about coronavirus is the fight for the future of the freedom of America. And I mean that very, very literally. We're going to be talking today and other days this week in the show about how much freedom is being taken away from Americans. And almost, we're not just tolerating it. We're kind of standing up and volunteering. Just tell us what to do next. How limited should we be? And I'll tell you, folks, this idea of freedom, this constitutional right of freedom, I'll close out the first 5 by just kind of teasing this story that I remembered from a constitutional law conference I went to years ago. There was some speaker at this constitutional law conference talking about the government's increasing standards with respect to refining and purifying fuel that run automobiles. And one point he was making is, if you continue to make it so expensive, in fact, maybe just, impossibly expensive, so you can't afford to drive your car because you can't afford to purchase the kind of car the government wants you to have, you can't afford to purchase the fuel that they are now requiring, it really is a constitutional problem, because we have a guarantee in this country from our founding, in the Declaration of Independence, a right, a God-given, simply because you were born, right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. If you can't leave your home unless they tell you, well, you must stay home when they tell you, and it's not a short order during emergency duration, but a long-term plan for America's future, we are surrendering freedom that we have a right to from the very founding of our country. And that, my friends, is today's First Five. So I told you at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us, Dr. Everett Piper. He joins us. It's a great thing this happens. He joins us the first Tuesday of every month, and you probably recognize his name. He is the author of that extremely great, initially just a statement to his campus, eventually became a book, This Is Not a Daycare, and basically the idea of talking to college students about the role of colleges is not to make sure that you are coddled and protected, but in fact you come to college to learn, to engage in a robust exchange of ideas. So he was a great college professor. He's the author of Not a Daycare. He's now a Washington Times columnist and a pundit. I guess that word has negative connotations. A commentator in many programs around the country. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Piper.
Thank you for having me on, Debbie. It's my pleasure.
So glad you're here. I see you have on your Not a Daycare shirt. Is that right?
I do, and you know that I've already apologized to you for my attire, but with the quarantine, you'll have to excuse me.
I think you look great. I was bragging about this shirt. I think it'd be fun to have one. So before we launch into this interview, I want to mention for our listeners, you can follow Dr. Piper on Twitter at Dr. Everett, Everett Piper, at Dr. Everett Piper. As I say, he's also a columnist on the Washington Times, writes just great, thoughtful, deep columns. So before we get into some of the things you wrote about, do you, as a college professor, if you're still, or a college president, if you're still back in those days, can you envision what you'd be talking to your students about the virus, responding to it, and the need to have a sense of standing up for their country, standing up for freedom? Do those arguments, my first five, they resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things that is implicit in your opening 5 is the value and the importance of a free people asking questions. One of the things I'm most disturbed about right now with regard to our reaction as a country is that we are virus shaming anyone that dares raise their hand and ask a question or step out of line. We actually treat them as if they're Typhoid Mary and you're going to kill grandma because you're not falling in line and marching off to the gulag. Now, let me be clear, Debbie, I'm not suggesting that I think the virus is a hoax. I'm acknowledging that there's a real disease, but I also think as a free people, we should be asking some very important questions. Otherwise, we're going to fall prey to the disease of ideology, the disease of fascism, ideological fascism, which the colleges and universities have already fallen prey to long before this particular crisis. I posted something the other day and I asked these questions. I said, are life and liberty both paramount values in America? Is liberty still a first thing for Americans, or are we willing to set it aside every time we feel like we're going to get sick? Is liberty a self-evident truth and an unalienable right, just as much as life? Are we willing to defend liberty as vigorously as we protect our lives? Are we willing to do as our founding fathers did and risk our lives in the defense of liberty? Are we going to suspend the Constitution every time there's a threat of large-scale illness in the country? We've got to be asking these questions. And if we don't, I feel as if we're taking Patrick Henry's statement, give me liberty or give me death, and turning it on its head and saying, I fear death, so take my liberty.
We are. We're saying we'll take deaf. We'll take that if that's our choices. This is a fabulous beginning to our talk today, and I'm so glad you're available to talk about these ideas. I love, first of all, your point that we are losing. In fact, I wrote it down, virus shaming. I'm going to borrow that phrase from you because it really is. It's an astonishing thing, even among people, generally speaking, the same side of the political aisle, same side of the aisle and kind of in the ballpark of thinking, are just frozen by the fear of this virus to the point that they are willing pretty much anything the government says. They just are waiting to be told their next step. And I think I will say, I've been saying this in the show this week, but I think when the virus first came along, many Americans in government and obviously millions of citizens had no idea what it was all about, felt alarmed by it, and felt a little bit like, okay, we got a crisis here, kind of like a tornado is coming or something. So we said, okay, tornado, fine, we understand we're supposed to stay at home and, whatever, get inside the house and get into a secure place. But we're past that now. We're past that initial phase, and we're starting to see not just the surrender to government orders, but it is policing of other citizens. You should describe, I think you described in one of your columns, what happened when you tried to pose those questions you just mentioned on your social media.
Well, here, let me give you one example, an anecdote. One of the people that challenged me in the line of questionings that I just proposed to you was the director of an international organization for religious freedom. You probably know who he is. I'm not going to mention the name of the organization, and I won't mention his name. I won't be Bush League on your show. But I will say a director of an international organization for religious freedom responded to me with this quote: "Freedom of belief is not an absolute." He said that. Freedom of belief is not an absolute. In other words, set your freedom of belief aside and go quarantine yourself. I thought, I'm stunned. I'm stunned that somebody who makes his life, it makes his living, has given his soul to the cause of religious freedom is telling me that freedom of belief, that's his language, is not an absolute. If that's where we are as a people, we are in trouble.
We are. I wrote that down because I don't even really understand what he means by, okay, we used to say it's a funny thing when our kids were growing up. If you would say, did you make your bed this morning? And they would answer, I did my math homework. He said, objection, non-responsive. I asked you, because it was a funny thing to say in our house. But I don't understand exactly what he means. It's because he's saying if you don't believe all of these virus warnings, is that what he's questioning? I don't understand his question. Do you?
Yes, in the context, he was challenging my line of thinking, and that is, wait a second, is liberty a paramount value equal to life? And is life worth living? Okay. Is life worth living if it's not free? Are we willing to sacrifice our lives for the cause of liberty like our founding fathers did in the American Revolution? Does the church, now see, I think the church should be leading on the issue of showing deference to its neighbor. If eating meat offends my brother, then I won't eat meat. Well, if breaking quarantine offends my brother, then I probably shouldn't break quarantine. But I shouldn't just sit back and allow the government to demand it. I should say, government, you have no right to tell me what to do. But as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, I'm going to show deference to my neighbor and make them feel comfortable as I serve them. There's a totally different issue here in play than kowtowing and bowing to the government's demands.
Could not agree more. It is the large question of mandate versus individual personal responsibility and individual consideration. What is your view? I meant to ask this. I meant to mention earlier, I wanted to ask you, but what do you think about the orders around the country that are saying that church, because more than 10 people cannot be together in one place, even if they are separated by their 6 feet social distancing, that churches cannot be open? Do you have a thought about that one?
I don't think the government has any business telling the church what to do. However, I think it is a bit Bush League, I'll use that word again, or that term again, for pastors to just rub their neighbor's nose in their freedom. Let's go back to Paul's admonition of eating meat. If it offends somebody, don't eat meat. Paul was saying, I have the freedom to do this. Nobody has the right not to tell me to do this, but I'm going to choose not to do it because I know it offends my weaker brother. And therefore, if my neighbor is scared, if my neighbor isn't a believer, if my neighbor is all tied up in knots over the coronavirus, I probably shouldn't rub his nose in my freedom. I might want to show deference to him. But at the same time, I'm going to scream from the rooftops, the government has no business telling me anything to do when it comes to my religious freedom. I think I can do both things at the same time, is my point. Plus, I think the churches should get and could get very creative in the way they conduct their services. Have your services in a parking lot, so that you're 6 feet apart in your cars. Go back to the old California model and the Texas model, where you actually had drive-in theaters being used as churches. Why not do that rather than just shut it down? Why don't go to the beach? Stay in your cars at the beach. Let the pastor preach to you from an intercom system so that everybody in the world can hear it, not just the church attendees. Why don't we get creative like that rather than just kowtowing and shutting it down?
I love those ideas. I really can relate to your point too about not rubbing it in people's noses. I have dear friends who are either very senior or have some other health condition who are very, very alarmed, and they want to stay home. They don't want to go anywhere. They want someone to deliver their groceries to the front step and leave it there and run away. I respect their concerns. I do not want them to be uncomfortable. I wouldn't mock or question them. But it's so odd what's happened in our culture. We have the people who want to be the stay-at-home ones mocking and ridiculing the people who are saying, I'm a little bit worried about the political direction we're headed. The mandates are coming from the government, but the shaming and scorning is coming from neighbor to neighbor, from friend to friend. And the idea that we're going to make you feel guilty because you decided today, I'm going to go for a walk with my husband, who's, already within 6 feet of me in my home. And people are just, even that, I'm aware of people being, and I think in addition to the legal and constitutional question, we're seeing a shift in our culture. It's like a cultural diminishing of the way we respect each other.
Actually, we've exposed something in our culture that I've been suspicious of as a college president, and that is ideological fascism. If you don't submit, if you don't agree, if you're not part of the group, if you don't march lockstep with everybody else, we will shame you, we will silence you, you're verboten, we will crush you. That's been happening on the college campus for the last several years. That's what No Safe Spaces, Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla's movie is all about. It's what Ben Shapiro has been exposed to when he's tried to speak at Berkeley. They've been shamed. They've been shut down. And now it's culture-wide, it's countrywide, and that is frightening. And here's another twist on it, Debbie. If the people listening to your show don't think that our enemies are watching and taking note at how easy it is to bring us to our knees without firing a shot, wake up and smell the coffee. If we don't think that people are watching and seeing how easy it was to shut down the economy, shut down the Constitution, and let everybody bow in submission, my land, what's going to happen the next time they actually decide to threaten us if we were this easy to conquer this time?
I agree with that about our enemies, our foreign enemies, certainly China being the main player now. There are all sorts of stories out about China is through their representatives in countries around the world trying to lay blame at America's feet for the coronavirus. They are talking about they want Mike Pompeo removed as Secretary of State because he is calling out their propaganda war. They are watching America crumble, watching our economy crumble. And the economy, as I keep saying, it's not about greedy people wanting more money. The economy is about everyday life, people being able to work, earn, put food in their table. And this weakening of America, I'm another shaming, social shaming that happens, virus shaming, is criticism of anyone who says, shouldn't we also be taking into account the impact on our economy, and our businesses and our families' abilities to support themselves, in addition to trying to stop the spread of coronavirus? What's your thought on that?
Well, we've got to take account of the economy. I think back to what was it? The Bill Gaither song. I'm trying to look it up here while we're talking. The Bill Gaither song of 1970, where he talked about the market street is empty. There's no traffic. The market square is empty. There's no traffic in the street. Housewives cease their labor. And then he proceeds to talk about the king is coming. The king is coming. Now, we are actually, I remember as a kid listening to that song and thinking, how would that ever happen? How in the world would that ever take place? Here are the lyrics. The marketplace is empty. There's no more traffic in the streets. All the builders' tools are silent. No more time to harvest wheat. Busy housewives cease their labor. In the courtroom, no debate. What on earth? Work on earth is all suspended as the king comes through the gate. I remember thinking as a teenager that was apocalyptic and it would be impossible for that to ever happen. I didn't understand how that could be a biblical prophecy that would ever come into play. We're watching it. We're watching it before our very eyes.
I know. And I don't know, the church has a great role to play in this country, certainly in the kinds of ways you were describing, to continue offering services and allowing people different ways to access the sermons and the service. I've noticed now on online Bible studies or Zoom Bible studies, people communicating with each other using what we have. But I wish that we'd see the church more willing to, in addition, speak up about we're stepping into a dangerous place of repression of our freedom as a country, and we're doing it out of fear. But that has never been, the Bible is full of fear not, fear not, fear not. And I wish the church would have at some point a little more voice. Church isn't just one thing, but the Christian church in America to say, we don't surrender our freedom here. We know what happens. Do you think the church could play a bigger role?
Absolutely. The church always has played this role. And here's the positive side of the story. We have seen for 2,000 years that Christ's promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, Christ keeps his promise. So I'm not fearful that the church is going to go away. I'm not fearful that somehow Jesus is going to lose. This doesn't surprise God. We worship God incarnate, the Word made flesh and dwelling among us, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb of God. Jesus is God. This storm does not catch him unawares. He chose to get in the boat. He was in the boat on Galilee when the storm came up, but he went to sleep and took a nap. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in a sermon that he delivered in the midst of World War II, said this: only faith allows you to sleep. That's why Jesus was able to sleep in the boat, because obviously the Son of God had ultimate faith. We need to recognize that this will be okay. We can relax and take a nap, if you will, in the boat. But then we need to wake up and recognize that the man who's in the boat with us, God incarnate in the boat with us, can still the storm and expects us to play a role in doing so. It is our responsibility to be the hands, the feet, the mouth, the eyes, the voice of Christ in the midst of the crisis. It is our job to calm the storm.
Wow, I love that. I will tell you that you're touching on all these points you made in your various Washington Times columns. I want to mention to our readers again, you ought to, first of all, we're talking to Dr. Everett Piper. And second, he does write, in addition to having written Not a Daycare, very good book, very great short column, very good book. But also columns he writes for Washington Times. I kind of, this show is very political, and I'm always talking about preserving America and the founding liberties. But what you are able to do so well with your life experience is to take biblical truth in a practical, everyday, conversational way and apply the deep truths of the scriptures to the issues that we face today. And so I'm thrilled to hear you're talking about the church that way. And I keep waiting for more Christian leaders to say, well, I'm going to go off on people again in a minute, but more Christian leaders to say, we need to be very careful. No, God isn't going to be harmed. Jesus is not going to change. Truth is not going to change. But in this shepherding of America through this crisis, we do, as Christians, have a role, a wonderful role, to inspire and encourage and care and provide solace, but really to be leaders of people who say that if we stand up for freedom, we should expect to be rewarded and defended, not endangered.
The story of the Bible is replete with being tested by fire, being refined by fire. We forget in America, I think, Debbie, that life isn't always easy, nor is it supposed to be easy. That's not the way the world is created. We live in a broken world. We live with in the reality of the original sin playing itself out on the nightly news. G.K. Chesterton said that the only empirically verifiable, provable aspect of all of Christian theology is the original sin. And if you doubt it, turn on the nightly news, pick up the newspaper, and you see that truth. the original sin is playing itself out. What we have right now is a combination of natural disaster and human reaction to it. Both of those things are broken. But in the midst of that, the biblical story is it's the believer's responsibility to step into the storm, not run away from it, to tackle it with confidence and courage, not cower in the corner. It is our responsibility basically to do what Rahm Emanuel said, and I'm no fan of Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel. However, what Emanuel said has great wisdom implied in it, and that is, don't let this crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste. It is our responsibility as believers to grab the crisis and to massage it and manipulate it to the advantage of freedom and human dignity.
Okay, I have never heard that Rahm Emanuel quote used for people who are trying to stand up for freedom, for America, for the founding ideas, for Christianity. Is always used, and I've been using it talking about how I see the left taking advantage of people's fear and expanding government power and collectivist behavior in Washington. But okay, I'm going to remember that. So I have three things now I've learned in this I'm going to remember from you. Last thing I wanted, so you wrote a piece in Washington Times, which is called, "Why Do Elected Officials Dismiss Positive Information about the Coronavirus?" That is the truest story. You can have the best news or all sorts of good bits of information coming out recently, but you can't talk about that. We don't go there. So what's your answer? Why do they dismiss it? Good news.
Groupthink. This is a massive textbook example of international groupthink. We're all just buying into the narrative without raising our hand and saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. I walked by the hospital yesterday and it wasn't overflowing with people on the sidewalks. I read that story about that infant dying in Louisiana, and you said that the infant died of COVID-19, but the infant was premature. It was born at 22 weeks. Don't tell me that infant died of COVID-19. The infant died because it was premature. It was 20 weeks old. To quote a doctor that was talking about this, it was half-baked. It wasn't fully baked. The infant was struggling because of the reality of being premature. We need to ask questions and expose the propensity of the human mind to go after the negative, to be sensational, to be hyperbolic, to instill hysteria because that sells. We need to challenge this as confident believers and say, whoa, 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 I'm not sure that's true. And don't let anybody virus shame you into silence. You're not Typhoid Mary just because you're asking the question.
And with that quote, you're not Typhoid Mary because you're asking the question. That's a great line. Well, I'm so glad you're available to talk today. And I guess most of America was kind of in our shelter-in-place mode. So we are in our home. So I'm so glad we could do this today. Well, thank you for all you do. Your writing on Washington Times and your continued advocacy for the ideas that you laid out in Not a Daycare. And your just energy and love for Christianity and our country as a nation of faith. So I just thank you so much for all you do. And thank you for joining me today.
Oh, I'm honored to be on your show. Blessings, be safe, be healthy, and be free.
And be free, and happy Easter, sir.
Likewise.
Thank you. So, my friends, as Dr. Everett Piper, so glad he could join us. And honestly, I knew we'd have a very energetic and spirited conversation. Every story we talked about, his columns on Washington Times, are available on our website. If you go to americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, you can read all of his columns. He just is so good at taking the issues of the day and really applying a lot of what he has come to learn and understand about the place of faith, but in a very it's not like sitting through a sermon. It's a very vibrant engaging on the issues. I did want to mention, before I go to my last topic today, I'm going to talk about the virus killing America's small businesses. There was actually in the beginning of the first five today, I talked about the idea that the Surgeon General is trying to warn America, other experts are, that we're going to have the worst week ever. And I encourage people of faith to challenge that and to get into the fighting spirit for preserving this country, preserving freedom, because it is under assault in America. But there's also good news that, as we were just talking to Dr. Piper, never makes it to the headlines. So one just little story, but I wanted to show you this picture. There's a woman who was actually astonishingly brave in the midst of this virus shaming, to use Dr. Everett Piper's term. She is a Democrat member of the state legislature in the state of Michigan. Her name is Karen Whitsitt. We'll put her picture up. and tell you what she did that I think is so great. First of all, great smile. Looks like a very happy person. So she is a Democrat member of the legislature in Michigan, from representing an area in Detroit. She came out in the news and said she wanted to thank President Trump and the hydroxychloroquine, the medication that we still have Dr. Fauci denouncing, but President Trump had talked about. Doctors in France have done tests and come out with, yes, this is curing and there's no more reason. This is helping people who are suffering with COVID-19. This brave woman, a Democrat from Michigan, came out, national story, to say she thanks President Trump and hydroxychloroquine because she was diagnosed with COVID-19. She actually began taking the hydroxychloroquine even before her diagnosis came back. She had her test done, but it wasn't one of the quick ones. But she had all the symptoms, so her doctor prescribed for her hydroxychloroquine, which is what she took, and she is perfectly healthy. And I just want to tell you, there are just so many other bits of good news floating around that is ignored by the media, because it's so much easier, more enticing when you're in the media to focus on death and symptoms and shortages and fear. These things propel the media, every story out there. But I will tell you just a few other quick things that were just positive news related to coronavirus and COVID-19. One is that this is not all the way positive, but I'm very much holding out hope. The UK, United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as you know, was diagnosed with, he has coronavirus, he developed COVID-19. He is in the hospital, and he was even moved to the ICU, but they announced, I think this morning or late last night, that in the ICU, he did not need to be put on a ventilator. He does not have pneumonia. He's in the ICU, obviously, because they're taking extreme precautions. But the point is, he is someone who is, urging his own country. We got to fight this. And he's fighting himself. But actually, more specific good news. Italy and Spain, two of the countries hard hit, have finally broken the upward swing in their pace of cases. These two hardest hit European nations are finally seeing fewer rather than more of caseload of the infection occurring. Italy's prime minister has offered President Trump and the United States effusive praise for their help. If you listen to mainstream media in America, you would think that Trump has not made one good decision or taken one positive action since the moment coronavirus sprang on the scene in the world. Clearly, the people who know what they're talking about are not buying into that. But it was a wonderful thing, that Prime Minister of Italy. And these are things that President Trump did behind the scenes, not seeking headlines, seeking to help. Third, Austria is reopening itself for business again as soon as April 14th, as is Denmark, with respect to schools. So there are steps that are positive in the world. And I'm not going to give a Pollyanna presentation and say everything's great, march on, we're over this crisis, because we're not. We're going to be dealing with it for a while. We have many, many pieces of good news, and I encourage you to remember those too, and to remember that we're seeing wonderful results in this country and around the world with this new medication, hydroxychloroquine. We are seeing cases of recovery. We're seeing more and more people who have, and again, the number is something like the percentage of people in the world who do happen to contract coronavirus or contract COVID-19. It's like 98% of the people survive. Keep that number in mind. 98% survive. So, we have this doomsday fear of moving that has enveloped this country and enveloped the world. We have to keep those bigger numbers in mind. I'm going to go through tomorrow on this show a great deal of data related to where we really are, contrasting numbers of all kinds and making the point that when the media has a chance to contrast numbers and make comparisons, they go about it in the way that makes Americans more fearful, more worried, more just cowering in their homes in fear. It is so intentionally, deceptively dishonest. But I'm going to close out the show today. I have one more topic I want to hit. Every time we talk about coronavirus and anyone tries to say, well, I think that should consider reopening the economy. I think we've got to look at ways to get Americans back to work. The chorus of virus shamers, I love that term Dr. Piper used, and I'm going to use that too. Virus shamers instantly go to the point of saying, Do you understand, the number of people who've died? Yes, I know that there are, it's a very sad pandemic around the world. Of course it's sad. But that is not responsive to whether or not we should also be trying to reopen the economy. And you have stories that come out from the leftists, from the, everyone freeze in place and no one do anything until we get permission from the ruling elite doctors to freeze in place for the rest of your life. The other way people battle against the idea that we should reopen the economy is by talking about individuals and saying, well, did you know that so-and-so, she lost her sister and her mother, and so-and-so suffered for 2 weeks. She barely made it. And so-and-so suffered, and then her husband died. They tell individual stories, which is something the left has perfected in dozens and dozens of issues. Tell individual stories, because they are heartrending, they are heart-wrenching, they draw people in. And so when people are hearing we should reopen the economy, they're picturing the story they heard from some leftist about an individual person. Yes, we all care about people suffering. We all want this to be over. We all understand people have suffered. But the economy is not about restoring the economy and getting people back to work, is not about greedy people who want more money in their bank accounts and are rubbing their hands together, can't wait to earn more money. The economy is about everyday Joe, everyday American. And I want to tell you about one in the great state of Texas. So here in Texas, we are in, total lockdown. We're in, where I live in Dallas County, shelter in place. You are told specific reasons you're permitted to leave your home. And a business owner wrote a letter to our governor in Texas. Our governor's Governor Abbott. And again, as I mentioned before in the show, he's Republican. All statewide officials in Texas are Republican. And we're still under this, pretty egregious, all businesses shut down, only essential businesses open. But I want to read you a little bit of this story, this letter this guy wrote to Governor Abbott, because it puts a human face on the argument about why we have to consider working toward reopening the economy. So this letter was written to to Governor Abbott by a guy named Jakey Saunders. And you can read the whole letter on my website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links. I want to tell you about this guy, though. He wrote this letter to say, he's trying to be nice to Governor Abbott. In your understandable haste to get an order out, I think perhaps insufficient thought was given to the need to keep business activity going as far as possible. So he describes his company. On Wednesday, April 1st, my company, Lone Star Comics, the guy owns a comic book manufacturing and shipping outfit. We, that company, Lone Star Comics, shipped 1,700 orders to customers, many of them wanting something to read while they're forced to stay at home. On Thursday, April 2nd, we shipped nothing. And I've been forced to furlough 110 employees, our entire Lone Star Comics family. So this is an individual owns Lone Star Comics, has 110 employees. He says about his business, we're not open to the public. We're in a warehouse district. All of our business is via internet sales. We've had no one sick, have been doing everything recommended to avoid COVID-19 virus. Our building is huge. He gives the square footage. Our workstations are all at least 6 feet apart, usually more, with separation screens and cubicles. About 20% of our workforce is working from home. So he's basically getting at they're already following the social distancing and careful standards that are in place. He says, our small business, the largest comic book retailer in the world, does, and they redacted the amount of money, I'm not sure why, in sales monthly. You've taken all of that, Governor Abbott, out of our economy. A lot of other businesses depend on us for business. We are, for example, the UPS's largest North Texas customer among companies solely located in North Texas. Up until yesterday, my family business was writing paychecks to 110 people. We need to get back to that. He also tells, as an interesting aside, this guy tells about the idea that he started this comic book business, this whole thing that he does. He started the comic book business back when he was in junior high school. He says, I started Lone Star Comics in 1961 as a kid in junior high, selling comics by mail order out of my bedroom. I put myself through college selling comics. I opened my first of 8 brick and mortar stores in 1977. Sold them after seeing more opportunity in internet sales. And now, when my business is booming like never before, I see it shut down needlessly. That really hurts. And I tell you that story, and I want to just do a little bit of embellishment on it. So this guy has 110 employees. Most, maybe all those employees have families. Families who rely on the paycheck those businesses bring home. Those people bring home. So the people don't have a paycheck now. So they may be likely are having a hard time paying their rent or their mortgage. So they don't have money to pay their rent or mortgage. And so the landlord who owns the apartment complex can't get rent payments from the people who work for him, as well as from everyone else in the apartment complex who have also lost their jobs because of this shutdown. Those people, in turn, don't have money. The people who used to work and get a paycheck from this Lone Star Comics, they don't have sufficient money to buy food, to buy clothing, to buy essential items. So they're waiting for a check from the government to help them over this hump. And because those people don't have money to spend, the Lone Star Comic employees, all the stores that they used to go to in their neighborhoods, the local grocery store, the drugstore, the gas station, the local 5 and 10, wherever they would shop, all those stores don't have customers because the customers don't have any money because they're not getting paychecks. I know this for some people, if you're an economist by background, you think I'm talking like economics 101, and I kind of am. But for Americans who think that the whole argument about bringing America back to work, helping America get back to work, bringing back our economy is somehow about mean, selfish, greedy, rich people wanting more money out of the stock market, that's not what it's about. It's about people like this guy, this Texan named Jakey Buddy Saunders. It's about Buddy Saunders in Texas. It's about people like him all over the country who own businesses, who aren't going to hurt anyone, who are willing to be compliant, and they can't open their doors. So employees cannot earn paychecks. And I'm going to guess this company, Lone Star Comics, they have the business version of what most people have in their home life, which is most Americans do not have savings to continue perpetuating their lifestyle if they lose their job. They don't have savings so they can keep on paying their rent or their mortgage. They don't have savings to keep on up their car payment or other payments on loans they've made, or to keep on paying for their family's life. Just like people don't have that, this business, Lone Star Comics, very likely it is not a high revenue, home run, the guy's a gazillionaire kind of business. It's a business. It's small business America. It's a guy who makes money by something he obviously loves, comics, and he ships them via internet orders around the country to people who enjoy them. And this guy very likely does not have the capacity to keep paying those employees, just like the people whom he employed don't have sufficient money to pay their bills. He doesn't have, this owner of this business doesn't have money to keep paying his employees. And then that owner, in addition to the fact he's not making internet sales, so he can't keep bringing money in, how long can he continue to pay for his own business? He's got a warehouse where people work. How long can he keep on paying his rent payment if he's renting, or if he has purchased it, to be paying the mortgage on the business, or to be paying his property taxes? People get forced to sell their property because they can't pay their taxes. This shut down the economy hurts real people like Mr. Buddy Saunders in Texas and millions of people just like him all over America. The economy, my friends, is about people. I'm going to go to wrapping up the show in just a moment here. I always turn at the end of the show to tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. I want to say something I'm going to repeat several times or in this week and next week and weeks to come. America's leaders responded to this threat of coronavirus, and much of the country was unfamiliar with it. Most people in government, and the restrictive orders that America is under are not coming from Washington. The prognostications are coming from Washington and Dr. Fauci, the predictions and the fear. But in this country, the orders that require people to stay in their homes, close their businesses, can't do this, must do that, all of those orders are coming from local officials, governors, mayors, county officials. Those people may be very good people. They may not be the kind of crazy police state, glad I finally got some power, rub my hands together to try to control people. They were responding initially to a serious threat and to alarm. But at some point, they need the people. We, the people, need to lead our local leaders. We need to be the leaders. We need to be the ones that say, hey, county commissioners court, city council, mayor, governor, we want to stand up. We want to lead you to a better plan than just submitting to fear and shutdown of our country because of this virus. America needs leaders like every one of you listening to this to be the mouthpiece, to speak up, to tell your leaders we want our economy back and our country back, because we don't want people like Buddy Saunders and his business and millions of businesses like that fall apart in this country. Now I'm going to turn and tell you, as I always do at the close of every show, I tell you why the stories that we talked about today matter to you. To start with, our first story today, we had the April 7th in Pearl Harbor, and we had the U.S. Surgeon General saying this week will be like Pearl Harbor 9/11. And I want to say it's time for a deeper perspective on that. America had just as much fear on December 7th, 1941 and September 11th, 2001, but surrender of our way of life was not an option then. It must not be an option now. There is good news, even though the mainstream media doesn't publish it. Solid results from hydroxychloroquine and the Michigan State rep from Detroit. Hospitalizations, ICU needs, deaths, not anywhere near the model projections. Spring weather is coming, have an ameliorating effect. America's Judeo-Christian foundation is alive in this Holy Week. Passover and Easter affirm life, protection, freedom from bondage. Easter doesn't need crowds in churches to affirm its enduring importance. And on our, we had with our last segment on the real life shutdown stories. The American virus killing America's small businesses. This small business owner from Texas, this letter I just read to you, from a small business owner to Texas Governor Abbott, nails it for the whole country. It's a classic small business, production of comic books for a niche market, 110 employees, productive and loyal, but probably all living paycheck to paycheck. Production efforts easily socially distanceable. No employees are sick. But government says you're non-essential, therefore, no money coming in from sales of comic books means no money going out in wages. All employees furloughed. Furloughed employees can't pay bills, rent, groceries, car payment, insurance, or anything else. President Trump must, and this is the conclusion I want to come to and go back to over the next several weeks. President Trump must get an advisory panel with more than just medical experts. He needs medical, business, legal, cultural experts, all having input to the decision-making in Washington. The lockdowns in this country must be lifted. And that, my very precious friends, is America Can We Talk for today. I'm Debbie Georgatos. This is America Can We Talk. I love the privilege and honor of talking with each of you every single time I do the show. I do this show, America Can We Talk, for the purpose of speaking up for this precious, extraordinary experiment in human liberty, which is America. I do the show to talk about preserving America and how even before this virus came along, there were many, many threats right at the doorstep of America's freedom that we talk about in the show. Right now, the coronavirus, we have to handle the virus, we have to get past it, and we have to not let this virus attack American freedom. I do this show to speak up for America because I love this country and I love the precious values upon which it was founded. I do this show to speak up for America, and I urge you to do that too. Speak up for America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
Can we talk? Truth about America.